Muskog Historical Society. And my wife, and she's going to introduce tonight's speaker. Because she knows tonight's speaker very, very well. Very, very well. Betty Young.
Good evening. I actually was the one that thought up this idea. This is my sister, Martha Elkin, and she has a farm in Sumner called A Wrinkle in Time, where they raise sheep and goats and herbs, and they have a draft horse, and they are working towards sustainable farming and being able to raise just about everything that they need. And so she is going to do a presentation tonight on wool, and pretty much all the way from when you shear the sheep and how you take care of the sheep and shearing the sheep and dyeing. She's got some information on dyeing and spinning and lots of information for you tonight. It's going to be very entertaining as well.
Entertaining, she says.
Yes.
Well, I'll begin with talking a little bit about my childhood, which is always fun to do. I remember as a small child, we lived right next door to a farm, and just up the hill was Redmond's farm. And they had dairy cows, and the pasture for the dairy cows and the hay fields extended on past the back of the house where we lived. And so one of my jobs as a child was to take an empty jug and walk up the hill to the milk room and deposit the empty jug and open the cooler and get out of the cold water, get a full jug of milk and carry it back down to the house and put it away. I think I helped with haying, although as young as I was, I probably wasn't a lot of help, but I did get to ride on the hay wagons. And one time when I was picking strawberries in the pasture, I remember being quite startled and frightened by the fact that a cow came along and put its hoof on my back while I was bent over picking berries. And I ran out of the field. Well, in those days, I never dreamt that someday I would be a farmer. I grew up and went off to college in Boston and became a registered nurse, and went to the Midwest and lived there for a number of years. And when my children were graduating from high school and going off on their merry ways, I thought, they're going hither and yon. I might as well go back to Maine to live. So my partner and I came back to Maine, and we bought this property in Sumner because we wanted the woods. And we bought about 32 acres. And we had this wonderful neighbor, Larry Perron, at the Morrill Farm Bed and Breakfast. And we'd been there, well, for almost a year, I think. It was the spring of the year. And he was wonderful. He was the very first one in town to welcome us to the neighborhood. And he always said he was a handyman. So if we needed any little odd jobs done around the place, he would come over and help us out. And one day he came over early in the morning, and he said, "You know what this place needs?" Looked around up and down the driveway, and he said, "This place needs a chicken and a rooster." And we said, a chicken and a rooster, eh? Well, what would it take for us to have a chicken? Well, he said, "I just happen to have a chicken and a rooster that I'd be delighted to bring over to you." Well, so we said, well, what would we do to take care of it? And he helped us build a little chicken coop, and he brought over the chicken and the rooster. And so that thus began our farming days with the chicken and rooster. As it turns out, we found much later, there were two reasons that he wanted to bring that rooster over. One was he said he had one too many roosters. And two, that rooster was crowing at 3:30 in the morning and waking them all up. Now, I love to hear the rooster crow in the morning. I really love it. So the next year, I think it was, in the spring, he came over and said, "You know, we've got some sheep that my daughter's raising, and we don't have quite enough pasture for our sheep. Would it be all right if we would raise our sheep in your fields?" Because, well, see, he'd been mowing the fields, and the fields had rocks. And he got concerned that maybe his mower was going to get damaged by the rocks in the field. So he thought, well, if you have sheep, see, they'll graze it and we won't have to mow. And so he brought over some wood that he happened to have and helped us build these wooden fences, and we rotated those wooden fences through the fields with his sheep inside all summer long. And indeed, they were the very best of mowers and kept the field very nice and tidy. And at the end of the year, he said, wouldn't you like to keep a couple of these sheep? So we said, what would that take? So he said, well, you don't need much. You've got a nice little shed out behind your carriage house there. Plenty of room for a few sheep. So we did indeed keep 2 sheep and a ram lamb. Well, come spring, and a friend of ours came over and said, when are you going to have lambs? And we said, lambs? What are you talking about, lambs? Well, she said, it should be any time by the looks of them. And she helped us trim their hind end, and we thought, well, wouldn't you know, the very next day we went out in the morning and there were lambs. Can you imagine what it would have been like had we gone out the next morning without having any warning? Well, we thought that ram lamb was way too young to be doing any of his shenanigans, but it turned out he did a very fine job. And those 2 lambs were Winnie and Lucy, which we consider our very first lambs. Actually, lambing is a very easy thing to do. As long as you can keep your hands off, the mother lambs will do just a fine job all by themselves. Okay, so we'd had sheep and lambs for 2 or 3 years, and then all of a sudden we're calling somebody to come and shear them every year. And Mary Ann, my partner, was learning to spin. I couldn't spin. I tried. I couldn't spin at all. Just wasn't going to happen. But she got pretty good at spinning. But there was way more wool than she could spin. There were more than 3 bags full. We decided, we're going to have to do something about all this wool. So we decided that we would see if we could start a little business. So indeed, that business has grown till now. This year, we actually done a bona fide business plan, and we have our little yarn shop, and we have most of our yarn sent out to the mills to be carded into wool, and some of it spun into yarn. The stuff that we sell is mostly spun into yarn. So that's kind of how we started. Now, let's talk a little bit about history. I love history. I wish I knew more about it, and I don't pretend to be an expert at all. But I did do a little research in preparation for one of the programs that I'm involved with, again at Moral Farm Bed and Breakfast. They do a living history program, and about 4 times a year they have college students or high school students come to their farm to live as people would have lived in the late 1800s. And they've invited me to present the part that relates to the fiber and the wool and the spinning and the carding and the dyeing and all of that. So I've learned a little bit over the time that I've been doing that, and hence that's why I have a costume like this. David was asking me some questions about my costume as we came here. Women in the late 1800s probably would have had 2 dresses. Women, the average woman that is, not the well-to-do of course, but the average woman would have had 2 dresses. One like this one that's for the Sunday go to meeting and special occasions, and one that would have been worn the rest of the week. And when you realize what it took to make a garment of this kind, you can appreciate why that was the case. First of all, they had to raise the sheep. In the late 1800s, I'm told that there were over 1 million sheep in the state of Maine. That most every farm had sheep, at least some sheep, and they would be dual-purpose sheep. Sheep that would be used for both their wool and for their for meat. In those days, the wool was coarser, and I'll pass this around because this is a typical coarse wool that might have been, and put it against your face and feel how it feels, because coarse wool is a little bit on the rough side. This is actually Cotswold wool.